When she gets back to DC, she's going to give him hell for this. February has seen the coldest of winters in the mountains of the western province. Most of the infrastructure in the earthquake area has been rebuilt, and the government has found host families outside the province for the children in the school. The Western provincial government is prepared to temporarily resettle these children to study in developed areas outside the province, and then bring the children back after the school has been rebuilt. Sending off the last group of children, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs delegation also embarked on the return trip. When the plane landed, Ivy wrote to Michael, "I'm back. There's no response from there." Ivy guessed, with her eyes closed, that Michael must be up to something again, and ceased to disturb him. Their mission is the longest and most meaningful one since the Ministry of Foreign Affairs organized this public service activity. After the earthquake, although the program was stopped, the mission team took care of the children all the time. They wrote a letter of invitation to war that determination, but also let the leadership of the Ministry of Moving, the Ministry of Special to them to open a commendation meeting, said the ministry is in need of them, the courage to take responsibility for the young people. Ivy did not return to the ministry for a long time. The praise should be praised, the next work has to continue. To do, piled up a large pile of work instantly all hit her body. The Rose sent Ivy to the office. When Ivy went in, Rose gave her a picture without saying a word. "Your Uncle Hunter's son, he's also in your translation division. Talk to him more about his work when you have time." On the back of that photo, it says the lad's contact number and microphone number. At one time Rose was quite fond of Michael as a junior. When he was a student, he was good at both his studies and after work. He was also very capable and good-looking. When he met his elders he was polite but not timid. Among the children in the compound he was considered to be the top of the talent, and he was very good at both his studies and after work. He was also very capable and good-looking. Rose used to think that it was her oldest daughter Amelia who was with Michael, and then she was shocked for a long time when she realized that it was Ivy who was with Michael. But it's kind of accepted, too. However, since that incident, there's been a complete turnaround in her attitude towards Michael. It's been too long since that happened. It's true that Amelia was left disabled. And it doesn't matter if Ivy did it or not. It doesn't matter so much whether Michael believes Ivy or not. Whether she believes Ivy or not. What matters is that she doesn't want her two daughters to have anything more to do with this man. There were a handful of fine young men in the ministry, and Rose picked and chose just the right one, Hunter's son. Ivy simply cried and laughed at the picture, but didn't retort to her mother, taking her things and going back to her office. "When I came home for dinner in the evening, I still hadn't seen Amelia. Her trip was long delayed, and she heard from the family nanny that Amelia came back home for a while and went back to Nepal." Ivy couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. She was really scared of this sister. Avoid her as far away as you can. It's springtime in Washington, D.C., in April. Flowers blooming, warmth melting. The annual International Security Summit, held in Washington. This is the world's largest summit on international security and the regional situation, which lasts 1 week and is divided into several modules, including modules on the regional situation, international security issues, international security response, international counterterrorism, and others. All countries of the world are represented, and simultaneous interpretation is carried out on-site in the 6 common languages prescribed by the United Nations. As a result of this meeting, the translation division has been very busy. They were notified 2 weeks in advance, and Ivy was scheduled for 7 or 8 sessions of simultaneous French language interpretation, large and small. For 2 weeks Ivy's been charging herself non-stop: disputes over maritime rights and interests, large-scale military conflicts, subversive infiltration, and non-nuclear strategies. Ivy was constantly expanding her thesaurus, but the topics of this summit were so specialized that many words she had never heard before, and now remembering them was a considerable burden on her brainpower. She understands that this is a new challenge. That the day before the meeting, Rose made a point of asking her how she was preparing for the Ivy did not dare to put too much stock in it, but only told Rose that every day she was preparing for the task, and trying to complete it as successfully as possible. The Rose nodded with satisfaction. In fact, in their line of work, there was no such thing as a perfect translation at any one time. There was only the ability to represent it as accurately as possible each time, and to make progress through experience after experience. The first day of the summit, for the first half of the first module on French simultaneous interpretation, Ivy's partner happened to be the same boy whose picture Rose had given her. David. The venue was some distance from Ivy's apartment, and to make sure she wasn't late, she got up early and eat breakfast. After breakfast, she put on a delicate makeup, changed into a small gray suit wrap dress, a pair of 7 centimeters of black high heels, looked very formal. Getting everything ready, she went downstairs and took a cab straight to the venue. David made an appointment with her to meet her outside the venue and go in, piece by piece. This is the first time the two have worked together. They've discussed about the work before in WeChat, and now there are some minor details to be finalized before the meeting officially starts. Rose had given Ivy David's contact info, but ultimately it was David who took the initiative to add her, and the two were really just chatting about work on WeChat. I wonder how Rose would feel if she knew. David saw Ivy approaching from a distance and greeted her very warmly. Have you had breakfast? Ivy nodded and winked at him. Just a little underfed, you know, can't eat too much. And David knew what Ivy meant. There was a translation job coming up and meals had to be eaten in moderation. Once upon a time someone ate too much and burped in the simultaneous interpretation booth while translating, a sort of translation accident. Ivy and David were talking and laughing, and together they headed for the venue. Michael had come to this summit with Commissar Lucas, who had a speech under the topic of the international security situation, but as soon as he arrived at the meeting, he saw the girl he hadn't seen in months. These past few months Michael was really busy. I guess Ivy was also busy, so the two didn't have much contact. He looked at Ivy's back. The girl was really pretty today. She was wearing a rather formal professional outfit, a wraparound skirt that set of clothes. Loose where they should be, tight where they should be, set off her waist as a waist and her legs as a butt. At the moment, walking beside Ivy, it was another man, and they were talking and laughing, and she didn't even look back at him for a second. Michael's mind was more than a little irritated and depressed. And what are you looking at, you? Political Commissar Lucas glimpsed Michael's eyes fell on a girl in front of him. Don't say. Just by looking at the back is quite slender and tall. Should be a pretty girl. This kid has been single for so many years, he's very picky about the girls around him, he can't look at anyone. Lucas thought for a while that Michael was hopeless, but now it seems that this kid isn't so unconscious. Michael averted his eyes lazily. No, Lucas knocked him on the head without mercy, and said no, your gaze is like a wolf, it is time to find a daughter-in-law. Michael was rendered helpless by Lucas' comment about what it meant to be like a wolf, and what it meant to be time to find a daughter-in-law. Can't he look at his daughter-in-law like a wolf? It's just that it's not the right time to have a showdown with Lucas. He changed the subject. Got it, Chief, the meeting's about to start, let's hurry and get in there. The summit began with a leadership statement as it formalized the topics of the modules. Michael was listening to it to the point of falling asleep, and would not have come at all, had not Lucas, the commissary, favored him with an article, and handed it to him again, and told him to be sure to come and speak, and dragged him over to the meeting, and he would have killed himself to come. He'd rather be out on the training ground, practicing with his officers and men with real bullets. Michael's eyes were heavy with sleep. Bad because he was wearing his regular summer clothes today, and Lucas looked at him with warning glances from time to time, or he would have put his head down on that table and gone to sleep long ago. This thing he did not do in middle school, but he is sleeping, but his grades are still too good to be expected. And once caused the class to be very jealous of the students. Lucas reached over and slapped Michael on the desk, couldn't yell at him because he was in a meeting, but could only whisper, get your ass in gear, don't embarrass the 60,132nd. Michael sighed, he couldn't go back to training now anyway. He pushed down his emotions and sat up straighter, and in the midst of his boredom, he saw the headset that lay on the table, and suddenly thought of the girl that as soon as he took the headset and put it on, a soft female voice, with a very heavy English bite, came instantly to her ears. Not Ivy. He tuned the channel, which was jabbering away in some unknown language for a moment, and ironically it wasn't her, either. He tuned again, just in time to hear a string of smooth French pouring out of the headset, making people feel very pleasant and comfortable. Is not it the voice of his own girl? Although Michael couldn't understand what Ivy was saying, just listening to it made him feel in a good mood, and all of a sudden his spirit wasn't as depressed as it had been a moment ago. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at the thought of his girl translating the speeches from the floor in synchronization with the sea. This is the girl he loves, so good, He'd like to tell the whole world that she's his. Michael raised an eyebrow at Lucas, the political commissar next to him, and said smugly that the interpreter's voice was really good, that Lucas literally thought he'd seen a ghost. And yanked Michael's headphones and put them in his ears. Listened to it for a while. Where's the good part? I couldn't make out anything but that it was a female voice. He's got a bad taste in women. Michael was a little annoyed at Lucas's actions, not having his own headphones resting there on the table in front of him, in favor of grabbing his, and at that moment, Lucas took those headphones off with great disdain, pissing off Michael even more. Michael nursed the headphones back into his ears, but after not even a minute of listening, the voice suddenly changed to a male voice that suddenly annoyed. Michael took off his headphones and snapped them down on the table in front of him. I haven't seen my girlfriend in months. I can't even listen to her voice. His movements were not light, and the commotion he made was naturally not small, as the people around them looked their way. Political commissar Lucas was busy giving others a smile. Sorry, this kid is a little out of sorts today, but except for a few Chinese who could understand, the other foreign guests, who looked at them with reproachful eyes, did not understand a thing. Lucas has been in the business for many years, and for the first time in his 50 years of age, the thought of digging a hole and burying himself has occurred to him. It's all because of this brat. It was not easy to wait until the end of the two topics, and the morning session was considered to have come to an end for the time being. The unit has booked a hotel for them near the conference venue so that they do not have to travel back and forth between the conference venue and their units in the suburbs during the conference. Michael was supposed to go back to the hotel with Lucas for a break at noon, but after the meeting broke up, Michael suddenly told Lucas he had something to do and told Lucas to go back first. Lucas wondered what else could be going on, this coming out to a meeting without having to train. What could it be? Michael's tongue topped his palate, smiled a little wickedly at Lucas, and spat out 4 hushed words, lifetime. At those 4 words. Lucas was startled. The boy was not to be outdone, it was to go to the girl he had seen in the morning. The thinking this way, Lucas looked at Michael with horror in his eyes, and Michael was made to laugh and cry by such a look from Lucas, and dragged his voice to Lucas and said, "Don't worry, I'll never commit a crime of style." The Lucas thought about it and agreed. The kid hadn't been unreliable the rest of the day, except for a bit of an up and down mood today, and went away. Relieved that the Michael stood in the doorway of the meeting hall, the index fingers of his hands pressed against the seams of his pants, standing like a statue. It can't be helped. Who let him wear this outfit today? When he goes back at noon he'll have to ask Lucas if he can change. He's brought his civilian clothes with him, too. Michael waited half a day, but didn't see Ivy come out, wondering what the girl was dawdling about in there. He rambled on for a while, and simply walked over to the side and took out his lighter and lit up a cigarette, which he brought into his mouth and inhaled deeply, then exhaled. Andy think he Michael has the courage and resourcefulness, iron bones, vertical and horizontal sand so many years. Don't end up being a white boy intercepted and, then he is going to lose his reputation. As he was thinking this, he saw an acquaintance come out, Benjamin, whom he had not seen for a long time. Benjamin was now secretary to a leader in Washington, and it was not surprising that he should be present at such a meeting. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and they stood and chatted for a while. As we were talking, Ivy came out and Michael's dark, inked eyes lit up, but his mood took a big turn for the worse when he saw the person next to Ivy. "It's that white-faced guy, again." He casually asked to Benjamin, "Who was that man?" That I didn't think Benjamin really knew who he was, with some playfulness in his words. "David, the son of the leader of their ministry in July, young and talented, and recently in full swing." Michael puts his cigarette out on the trash can, throws it in, walks away. "Talk to you next time." He sauntered over to Ivy, and was already standing in front of her before she saw him, with some consternation in his expression, and David for suddenly appeared in front of him, and Ivy also feel a little surprised. After half a morning of translation, the voice is dumb. Fortunately the ministry is not too ruthless, the second half of the other people to cover up, otherwise he and Ivy are going to collapse. He just and Ivy proposed to go to eat a small hanging pear soup, just to moisturize their throats. Next to the inexplicable rushed out of the man, blocking the way in front of them. The David's cultivation has always been good, even if he does not like in his heart, he will not show it. Besides, the other party looks to be a practitioner, his body and the other party is not in the same level. He smiled warmly. "You are." The fire in Michael's heart is going up to 3 feet high, and you, sympathetically enough, Ivy looked at Michael's fire-filled expression and tried to laugh. She only tugged the corner of her mouth slightly before she saw that he was looking at her with fire in his eyes. She dared not laugh at once, but could only stifle her laughter with a raw. David sees the interaction between the two of them and asks, "You know Ivy?" Having worked with David, Ivy could sense that David had a good temper, but there was already a momentum between Michael and David that wasn't right, and it wasn't good for the two of them to be at a standstill like that, and Ivy took the initiative and spoke up. Michael is faster and sharper, and I'm her boyfriend." David was a bit baffled. When his father told him about this girl a few weeks ago, he said she was still single. Even today's meeting where the two of them were paired up for simultaneous transmission was his father's idea. He kinda likes this girl, too, but how long has it been since a boyfriend popped up? Ivy laughed in her mind. Michael was so uptight with this flying jealousy, she just had to introduce David to Michael, but before she could say anything, Michael said in a knowing tone, "David, hello, I know you're a colleague of Ivy's." It would be as if Ivy had mentioned David to him, and Ivy was puzzled. The two were busy with their own business after coming back from the Western Province, and they hadn't even met yet, so how did he know about David? In fact, when Ivy saw Michael today, her heart was still a little emotional, not for anything else, just for the fact that when he left from the epicenter, he didn't even say hello to her. Originally thought that she must rely on him to coax herself, but when she saw this childish look of him eating a lot of flying vinegar, she instantly didn't want to be angry with him. David smiled a decent smile, but couldn't hide a twinkle in his eye. "Hello, it's time to pick up Ivy." Michael didn't deny it, and Ivy looked at him and said, with a smile in her mouth, "We were just talking about going to Little Hanging Pear Soup for lunch, and simultaneous interpretation is supposed to be a cerebral and physical thing." She and David were already hungry after translating the first half of today's session. It was just a matter of having a meal together among colleagues. Ivy. Frankly, Michael's blood churned. He took a deep breath. Just now he didn't know he was there. It's just a matter of talking and laughing. Now he's here, and she has to go to dinner with this stinking man. Calm down, Doc. He turned to a different expression, and a mournful July came out of his mouth. "I haven't eaten either." And the tone of his voice was so pathetic that Ivy somehow seemed to hear something of petulance in it. "I'm hungry after a morning of meetings, too." Michael continues to ride the wave. "Then we'll go together?" Ivy asked Michael. Michael nodded evenly, and David's heart was as bitter as a yellow fever. But he could only say magnanimously, "Let's go together, then." David and Ivy's translation duties were done for the day, so they didn't have to go to the venue this afternoon. They each have another translation assignment tomorrow morning and afternoon that they're going to be partnering up on piece by piece, so they just need to go back and get ready, so they're not in a hurry. Michael was to have a meeting in the afternoon. He took his cell phone and messaged Lucas, not feeling well. He would not be there in the afternoon. After sending the message, Michael didn't look to see if Lucas had replied, and tossed his cell phone aside in a smooth motion. Ivy looked at his leisurely look and asked him, "Don't you have a meeting in the afternoon? Aren't you in a hurry?" "Oh, the chief told me not to go over there this afternoon," and Michael answered with a cloudy. Ivy couldn't help but be stunned that the attendees of this summit could still go if they wanted to and not if they didn't want to. While the two were talking, David gentlemanly poured pear soup for Ivy, and was about to pour it again for Michael. Michael's eyes wind up with knives capable of killing, waving his hand to stop. "I don't drink pear soup." Ivy remembers them having autumn pear cream together when they were kids. How could Michael not have pear soup? It was the first time Ivy had ever seen Michael squirm, and knowing that he was playing a childish prank, she couldn't help but think that her boyfriend was really special when he was being cute. David, still smiling demurely, set the pot down in his hand only slightly awkwardly, and Ivy and David chatted about some work stuff while the food was still coming up. To be honest, the process of being partnered with David as a simultaneous interpreter was delightful. David's own professional quality is too hard, the brain good quick reaction, since childhood with his father stationed abroad, before being sent to France for 2 years of further study, the mastery of the French language can be said to be perfect. In the process of simultaneous interpretation, Ivy encountered what words stuck. He will immediately write in a small piece of paper to hand her, for her to solve a lot of crises, and the first time he will write on the paper, and the first time he will write on the paper, and the second time he will write on the paper. Ivy was humbled by this. She thought she had prepared well, and there were still a lot of places where she almost slipped up. It seems that the information for tomorrow's meeting needs to be added, and she'll have to go back and prepare for this. Michael was listening on the side. These two were chatting feverishly, seemingly treating him, a big living person, as if he was air, although the conversation was about work, but he was still uncomfortable in his heart. But he had no valid reason to interrupt them. On second thought, he called out for Ivy. July. It was then that Ivy got busy and glanced at him, and, well, he sounded like a child looking for candy from an adult, resigned and pathetic, so different from his usual self. I was thirsty, and Ivy hands Michael his own glass of water. Drink mine. Without saying a word, Michael lifted her glass of water and took a big gulp of it. David's jaw dropped. Wasn't Ivy's cup of pear soup, and I thought Michael didn't drink pear soup. David gradually mulled over the fact that, although Ivy hadn't personally explained her relationship with Michael, her actions had actually proved that by the time the meal was over, Michael was leaving, dragging Ivy with him. Ivy remembered something, told Michael to wait for her, and thumped back to say goodbye to David, my mom, who still didn't know that Michael and the David nodded. Don't worry, I won't say anything to Aunt Rose. He said it easily, but in his heart 1,000 waves had long been stirring. Between the two of them, though the 8 was not yet over, he had a feeling of being deceived. Only the good breeding of his childhood restrained him, and he would not show too much anger. The Ivy said a quick thank you to David, turned and walked briskly toward Michael. She was wearing a pair of pointed high heels today, the heels of which struck the concrete floor with a crunching sound, so that one could feel a heartfelt pleasure in them. Michael watched Ivy walk up. His mood, which had been gloomy for most of the day when he'd bumped into her joking around with the white boy, had finally cleared up completely. When Ivy came up to him, he reached out and took her hand in his, and his palm was warm, but it was also hot, like it burned into her heart. That David, stay away from him in the future. Michael did not drag his feet at all, pouring out his displeasure at once. Ivy finally couldn't help but laugh. He and I are just co-workers. Michael's machismo kicked in, and his co-workers were still talking and laughing from the morning until now. Ivy laughed even more happily, and without hesitation, she wrapped her hands around Michael's neck. Xiaoxuan brother, before, my mom did intend to set me up with him, but in my heart, only you are the best. I can't look at anyone else but you. Michael felt Ivy's intimate movements, coupled with her sincere words. The happiness in his heart was about to overflow. What you said, it's true. Of course it's true. Well, you don't have anything else to do this afternoon? Michael asked. In fact, just now, in between Ivy's conversation with that white boy, he had already mapped out her work schedule for the past few days. Ivy replied truthfully, no more, just still need to prepare for tomorrow's. Might take a while, and your apartment's pretty far from here, Michael said, pretending to be careless. Ivy nodded. She'd taken a taxi this morning, and hadn't gotten stuck in traffic. It had taken an hour. The traffic in Washington was worrying, and it would have been hard to tell if it had gotten stuck in traffic. It would have been hard to tell if it had gotten stuck in traffic. It would have been hard to tell if it had gotten stuck in traffic. Michael's heartfelt advice to Ivy, don't go back tonight. Ivy looked at him, her round, watery eyes filled with disbelief, and he pulled a room card out of his pocket at her uncomprehending stare and raised an eyebrow. Staying at my place. Ivy's face swished red, and her eyes dropped, not daring to look at him again. She spat out 3 words softly. No way. Head came Michael. A low laugh, followed by her head was gently knocked. Michael said, what do you think? The venue is also far from my unit, so I and the political commissar in this side of the hotel room. You live in my place to go. Convenient, to save you to run back and forth, tossing. Ivy hesitates. In order to allay her concerns, Michael could only further say, you political commissar's room is next door to mine. If you don't feel at ease, I'll go over to his side and stay with him, and you'll stay in my room. In fact, it is not that the two have not had the experience of sharing a room together, and once upon a time they also have some very intimate behavior, but after many years, the two have just re-together. Everything is like a dream. Ivy subconsciously hesitant. But Michael's words were so earnest, his eyes so sincere, that it made Ivy think she was overthinking things. The next day, to use the meeting material she carried with her, which is in the Ministry of Work over the years to develop the habit, important information, documents are carried with them, to ensure that not lost, while in case of emergency, so even if you don't go back in the evening, you can continue to make preparations. But I didn't bring the stuff I need. Now go get it, Michael said as he took Ivy's hand and headed for the convenience store across the street. This isn't good, Ivy, pointing to Michael's clothes. Michael quickly realized that she was worried that it wouldn't be very nice for him to be in full uniform, dragging a woman around on the street. Michael justified it. July, I'm almost 30. I could have filed a marriage report a long time ago. In that case, Ivy fought off her hesitation and followed his movements as she walked with him to the convenience store. There's not much to buy, really. Just some toiletries. Walking past one of the shelves, Ivy took an item in a swift motion and threw it into the shopping basket with a flying motion. It was just a small gesture that caused her face to blush and burn. What kind of eyesight does Michael have? Ivy was moving even faster, and he could see it clearly. It's just that the girl's shy, so he pretends not to see it. Michael looked down and smiled darkly. His girl, so cute in every way. Ivy took it upon herself to hide behind Michael as she entered the hotel elevator. It's not good for your chief to see her. This girl a few days ago bold to no bounds, in his unit of military training did not say to restrain a little, this moment but careful up. But Michael was also thinking that he'd have to change out of this outfit later, or it would be a bad influence on the. Michael raised his hand and looked at his wristwatch. It was after 2 in the afternoon. Lucas had left for a meeting early. Besides, what's wrong with him being in love? Why does he have to be so sneaky, like he's cheating on his wife? But that seems to be a little fun, too. Michael answered her back. No, the chief is supposed to be at a meeting. It was then that Ivy straightened her back, got out from behind Michael, and stood side by side with him. Michael's army green regular clothes were too much of a bore. And when he reached his room, he found his civilian clothes and prepared to change out of them. He looked over his shirt at Ivy, who was sitting on the single sofa by the window, and who was also looking at him with interest, and her eyes were watery, like peach blossoms in full bloom on a spring day, very brimming, and inside they were laced with desire, very lingering. He had leaned down and kissed her on the lips as his mind spun, and her lips also had the fragrance of peach blossoms. Obviously he had not been drinking, but he was as if he was drunk. He could not help but kiss deeper. This is his girl. His girl alone. From now on, he'll build a solid wall for her, blocking out all the storms. Ivy hung herself onto Michael's body as well, and their kisses grew more and more entwined. With one hand on Ivy's head and the other on her hip, Michael brought the person to the bed in the center of Michael's magnificent body pressed down, and Ivy looked up at him without feeling oppressed, and just moments ago when Michael had kissed her, she had been a little afraid, but as they moved and became more and more intensely entwined, she suddenly wasn't afraid of give it to him if he wants it. He loves her, and she loves him. There had been so many misunderstandings between them, they had missed so much time, and they were lucky to still be together. Michael's hands were a little rough from years of holding a gun, and a shiver ran through her whole body as they brushed over her snow-white skin. She's so soft, and her skin is so delicate, and Michael thinks she's bewitched him. His hands were rubbing and hovering around her waist, fondly. Michael, however, rolled over violently and sat on the edge of the bed, drawing steeply away from Ivy. Ivy opened her eyes and looked at him with some aroused lust and confusion, and there was some reproach in those eyes, that teasing and lovely. Michael couldn't help but be amused, and with some gasps he told her, I'm in the military, I don't do the get on the bus before you buy a ticket thing. Ivy had been a little short of oxygen in her head, and when he said that, it made her laugh. Her clothes were already left under his strong attack. She pulled the quilt aside and pulled it towards herself, deliberately teasing Michael. But the Liberation Army uncle in my place can be free of charge. This girl, he's about to let her go, but she won't let him go. It was with great difficulty that Michael suppressed his lust, lest he should be aroused by the girl again. He reminded himself that she had 2 more translations to do tomorrow, and much to prepare for, and that he would certainly not be able to escape tomorrow's meeting, and that it was not unlikely that he would be cross-examined by Commissar Lucas. Michael rolled out of bed, quickly picked up the clothes that had just landed on the floor, and fled into the bathroom, where I went to get changed, and behind him came a silvery giggle. Ivy's, the little devil, and laughed at him. Can't let her be any longer. The marriage report has to be typed up early, though Aunt Rose doesn't treat him very well now. But there's no one else who can break up him and Ivy. Chapter 8. The cheating couple. Michael went to change and Ivy sat up and straightened her clothes. The formal wear would have to be worn in the morning, but now it was all wrinkled. She'd have to take the hotel iron and iron it later. Michael was quick to change. He had practiced after all, and was out in a few moments. The Ivy asked Michael if you had any other clothes. Michael froze, thought for a moment, and said, there. As he rummaged through his clothes and handed her a shirt, and she went into the bathroom to change. Anna's clothes were large and very loose on her, but they only just covered the roots of her thighs, making it feel incredibly humiliating that sure enough as soon as she stepped out, Michael froze, his eyes hovering over her pale legs. The Ivy trotted a few steps and covered Michael's eyes with her hands, pouting, no looking. The Michael smiles good-naturedly, without looking liar. She had clearly felt his eyelashes brushing against her palm like little brushes, even when she covered her eyes. He wasn't being honest and well, I'm only fooling you. Michael wrapped one hand around Ivy's waist and took her hand over his eyes off with the other. Isn't there something else to do? Hurry up and get busy, and then sighed a little helplessly, wearing so little, and not afraid of catching a cold. He pushed her over to the small desk in the hotel room, and pressed the person to the bench again, turning himself to get a coat, which he put over her legs. The Michael was next to Ivy, and she couldn't get into it anyhow at first, but it only took a while, and she soon got used to it. And Ivy was getting things ready for tomorrow, and Michael, doing nothing, moved another chair and propped his chin up to watch her, and she'd been reading the profile for a while, and in her busy schedule she'd looked up at Michael. It had been a long time since they'd had such a quiet, idle time, as if they were back when Ivy was in high school. During the summer and winter vacations, Michael would come back from military school and do her homework with her, explaining to her the problems she didn't understand. It was such a short but wonderful time. Ivy, who was reading the material, suddenly frowned, and the joint blockade operations, the joint land maneuver strikes, she did not know the exact meaning of these words, not to mention their translation into French, even in Chinese, and for a moment was a little distressed by the. Michael saw Ivy furrow her brow and asked, "What's wrong?" Ivy shook her head. "It's nothing, it's just that the meaning of the words. I'm not quite sure how to turn them into French, all of them." Michael smiled and padded over to her, looking over her profile and explaining to her what the two words meant. Joint land maneuvering strike, that is. Michael, who was exceptionally familiar with these things, was concise and in a few seconds made it clear to Ivy, who quickly translated the two words into their French counterparts, as well. And so it went all afternoon, with Ivy coming to ask Michael if she didn't understand any specialized terminology about the military. Michael answered her questions one by one as well, much more efficiently. Ivy's also a little more pumped up about that translation tomorrow. In the evening, because Ivy still had many things to prepare, the two of them did not go down to eat, and just after ordering takeout before it was delivered, the door of the room was knocked on. Ivy and Michael looked at each other. Ivy blinked, Michael smiled and stroked her head. "It should be Commissar Yu. I'll go check it out, you just stay here." Michael threw the door open and Lucas's mellow voice came sashaying in. "Michael, you're going to be immortal, you're a brat, and you're not even going to eat." Before the word meal could be uttered, he dimly saw a girl sitting in the room, though without looking away. However, Michael had pushed him through the door and closed it with a thud. Lucas was on fire. "What are you doing? That's why you didn't go to the meeting this afternoon." Michael hurriedly explained that you want me to find a girlfriend soon, and that's my girlfriend inside. Lucas's eyes are wide. Michael continued, "I didn't mess around. My girlfriend is that girl in the morning, political commissar's daughter Ivy. She's the interpreter of the meeting. There is still a translation task tomorrow. The preparation has been in the afternoon, and we have to continue to get it in a while. We won't go down to eat." The Lucas eyes were almost as big as brass bells. This was the girl who had been entangled with this kid for years. How come she appeared again without saying a word? Just as he was thinking, Michael's voice came to his ears again, almost dropping his jaw. "You have seen it. I'll call the marriage report. You have to approve it faster." Lucas had mixed feelings about not going to a meeting this afternoon, just for this girl. The Michael nodded. "She almost ran off with someone else today. I had to come and get her." Lucas waved his hand. "Okay, you pay attention to your own proportion." He walked out a few steps, and then suddenly turned his head. "Your marriage report," quickly typed, "or I won't approve it." That today's this explosive news, and so back to the regiment. He must talk to Renbagwa properly, but also a happy thing, let them worry about so many years of Michael's personal problems, finally solved. The next day's translation was still done by Ivy and David together, and as both were very well prepared, the task was successfully accomplished. It's just that Ivy didn't interact much with David after she finished her work. due to that big jealousy of Michael's. The third day's translation was in the afternoon, and since it wasn't nice to always stay in a hotel with Michael after all, Ivy was ready to go back to her apartment. Michael had driven over in his own car and offered to give her a ride. Ivy was worried about holding up Michael's meeting, but he said it was fine and turned his head and messaged Lucas about taking his daughter in law home. Lucas cried and laughed when he got the news, except that he knew that Michael, a man who looked hangdog when it didn't matter, but was a man of his word when it did matter, this kind of meeting, just let him be. Michael and Ivy went to the hotel's parking lot and picked up their car, dropping Ivy off at her apartment. The car parked in the parking space. Ivy just want to get off, was called by Michael. This you take, anyway. I usually also in the unit basically do not come out, seldom used, have a car you commute to and from work more conveniently. Michael gave Ivy the keys to his car.so. How are you going to get back? Ivy asked uneasily, and Michael was rambling. Took a cab. It was pretty quick. He blocked out all her reasons for refusal, and she was so moved that she could only take the car keys and drive safe. Don't fight with others. Ivy nodded. Michael brought over another copy of the manuscript. Here's my speech for tomorrow afternoon. I think it's the one you're in. You can look at it and call me if there's anything you don't understand. The earlier, when he'd accompanied Ivy to the hotel to prepare for today's translation, Michael hadn't told her that he'd be among the speakers tomorrow afternoon. He's thinking of letting Ivy get one done before thinking about the next, and not putting too much pressure on himself, so he's just giving her the stuff now. Their previous interpreters had only been able to get the gist of the speaker's statement in advance, not the full text. The full text of the speech was now available almost 24 hours in advance, which helped Ivy immensely in her preparations. Ivy was particularly moved to look at Michael. Thank you. Michael's habitual tongue against his palate, both cheeks moving slightly with the intention of thanking me just like that. That seemed like such a perfunctory way to thank him, but luckily Ivy wasn't too dumb and leaned over to land a sloppy kiss on the corner of Michael's mouth. The following afternoon, Ivy sat glowingly in the homophone box. The meeting was officially opened with the commissioning of the equipment. Ivy from the headset heard Michael's clear voice. The international security situation cannot be underestimated. Regional security has become a major issue in international security. With Michael's nice and methodical voice, Ivy simultaneously translated the contents into fluent French. David hadn't started translating yet, but he did put on his headphones while listening to Ivy's translation so that he could offer help if something went wrong. It was only when that voice reached his ears that his whole body shook, and he looked with some surprise at Ivy, who gave him a slight nod. And in his speech, Michael mentioned his many experiences in counterterrorism and in evacuating foreign nationals, and although his tone was unperturbed, it was followed by countless bloody storms, births and deaths. Ivy almost burst into tears yesterday while reading Michael's speech. Michael's speech ended with thunderous applause from the room. A week-long meeting is not too long and not too short. Ivy and Michael were even busier during the 7 days of meetings, having a few meals together, seeing each other a couple of times, and finding each other very sweet. At the end of the week, Ivy was going back to Ivy's house, as usual, and Rose had informed her ahead of time that Amelia was coming back on Saturday, and that meant she had to be in. Ivy had no choice but to stay at Ivy's house since Friday night after dinner, and had little desire to go out and fool around with the little group of friends in the compound. When Olivia found out, she messaged her in WeChat even more angrily than Ivy. If she bullies you, I'll come to your house and whip her. And Ivy laughed. We are all adults, there is a big grudge and a big grudge, what else can we do? She went back to Olivia. No, Michael had the week off, but Amelia called him and asked him to pick her up at the airport. If it were anyone else, Michael would have refused.